Hi, everyone. So we're about to get started. Welcome, everybody, and welcome to our first ever Masterclass Series. And this is our May Combo Collect event. And I'm your host, Olivera Bay, and I'm super excited about our discussion today with our featured speaker, Adam Emfield, and also really excited for everyone joining us across the globe, and as well for everyone that's volunteering as part of this collective. Just a few things, housekeeping, and I'll just move on to the next slide to showcase all of our awesome volunteers, such as Emily Jones, Fatima Petrola, Meredith, Bishma, Olia, Louisiana, Ali, Tim, Anchor, and last but not least, Marcy Hill, who has joined us recently. Thank you so much, Marcy. Everyone that participates in our collective is doing it of their own time and ambition, and it is. And on that note, we also want to highlight our 2024 sponsor, VoiceFlow. We're so excited to have VoiceFlow supporting us. It's a collaboration, and we're looking forward to many more great events together. And this is one of those, which is our very first Masterclass series as part of the agreement we have with VoiceFlow. And moving on, please back and sign up for our newsletter if you haven't already, and join our Slack as well as our LinkedIn group to find out more about our events. And this is our Eventbrite as well as our website. We have some resources on our website for conversation design best practices. Feel free to use those. And a quick agenda for our event today. We're going to cover first 10 minutes is our intro. And then after that, of course, it's not a panel discussion because it's a featured speaker. And last 10-15 minutes is our questions. And then as well, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us where you're joining from and what brought you here. And feel free to drop any questions in our chat as well. And we'll try to answer all of them. We've also pulled the questions from the Eventbrite, and we will be answering those, or Adam will be answering those as he goes through his talk. And from there, we will, let's dive in. So just to make an intro, this is Adam Emfield. Adam and I used to work together at Serence. He's someone I really look up to. He's taught me so much in UX research and conversation design best practices. And so I can't say enough good things about Adam. By the way, Adam is available for an awesome opportunity. And from there, I'm going to let you take over, Adam. Thank you so much for joining us.
So thank you, Olivera. And thanks everyone for coming out this morning. So give me just a moment. I need whoever's sharing the moment to stop. It won't let me share until you are done. Then I can.
Just give me 1 second.
No worries. There's always got to be at least one hiccup, especially for those of you on the West Coast, since it's nice and bright and early for you.
Sure. I think you should be now.
Yep, I should be able to. Look good? Okay. All right. So yeah, thank you everyone for coming out this morning. This is something I'm really excited to talk about, and I appreciate the invitation from Olivera and the Conversational Collective for this. And you'll see that this is something that I get excited about, and I hope leads to some great questions and discussion at the end. So I'll get into everything I mean about tool, teammate, and person in a minute. But first, let me give you a little bit of a background on me that might help you understand my framing around this. I won't read you all of those details, but you'll notice that my background academically ranges in psychology and engineering, a mix of things along those lines. And professionally, right now, I'm just wrapping up a contract at the Rochester Institute of Technology to teach in human-computer interaction. And as Olivera said, looking for what's next. Prior to that, though, I was at Cerence with Olivera, and shout out to Jenny here in the audience who was also there with us, where I was doing leading UX and UI design and research. So the conversational aspect, the visual aspect, and all the things along those lines as well. But I want to touch on the other stuff about me that gives a little bit of insights as well. I talk about being a lover and hater of AI. I think that's probably something that's fair to many of us who use it a lot. I love the potential it's brought me. I hate that it may have had a role in some lost job opportunities in the past. I love that it can answer random questions when I need it, and I hate that it's causing issues in some of the limits on the data it's trained on, for example. So we'll come back in some of those, but it's I've got a love-hate relationship with it, let's say. And my examples in this lecture will likely all focus on the conversational AI side, but if something from astrophysics sneaks in there, I'll just let you know that's where I geek out in my spare time, and in other sciences as well, because it's kind of fun for that as well. And I will fully disclose up front that I use generative AI as part of this lecture, as part of this talk. One, to showcase its strengths and disadvantages, but two, it's also something I tend to use in my daily life. There we go, moving on along for me here. Okay, so I figured if I started out, I would just ground us in what I mean by using AI as a tool, a teammate or a person. And I would allow generative AI to define itself and what it thinks it is, or at least how it would describe itself in natural language here. And you can see the definition here, and it sounds like something you would expect with any level of exposure to AI, where it talks about its ability to create content that it's learned from existing examples, using the common terms we'll hear in AI, deep learning, deep neural nets, and that it mimics stuff based off of the data here. And I just wanted to highlight, key part here as someone who appreciates statistics and machine learning from another perspective as well, is that this is somewhat, these seem to be out of time. Sorry about that. Seems to, it's implying that it's only as good as the data it's trained on. There are going to be limits if the data isn't particularly good. And that's something that I think will take a big role for us as designers who use this tool in the future, because the internet of data that it's trained on is imperfect. So I had a student actually, knowing my background, ask me before a similar lecture to this semester, what was the implications of generative AI beyond just chatbots within the HCI and the UX realms. And while this is based on the conversational things, I wanted to mention this because we're seeing a lot of bleed over where there's a lot more use of AI that is for multiple modalities. So even if you focus on conversational design nowadays, you're likely doing multimodal design or working with designers in other spaces. And there have been some interesting developments here that I think are worth surfacing a little bit before we get into this conversation here, because it is multidisciplinary, not just conversational design. And some of these, for example, are the increasing presence of large action models, where instead of just being language-based, they're recommending actions that can be done in part of the UX. This is something more emerging. If you follow a lot of people on LinkedIn, I've heard this talked about from people at VoiceFlow for many times, and other companies as well. These are taking more of a place. They're also having the ability to integrate more things that are exciting to us as humans for communication, such as the ability to use gestures, eye movements, and facial expressions. And I highlight below here that there's companies like Effectiva, who was acquired by SmartEye, that look at emotion and try to give you that information so you can interact with that. And that's something that's becoming more than just surface level it was a few years ago, where it can do more than just give you a mood. Someone is happy at the moment, and can actually try to integrate it in a way that's more meaningful with the way it responds. And that has implications for us as well. And then two last things I'll point out for this one. There are still issues with these, though, where they are still sometimes falling into the uncanny valley here. Uncanny valley, for those who may not be familiar, you should have had a graph for this, but if you think about how realistic content is generated by AI, and then how comfortable we are as humans with it. As it gets more and more realistic, you go this way, people like it more and more and more. And then there's this really weird, creepy zone we call the uncanny valley, where things suddenly just feel really odd. They just don't quite feel right. They're almost human, but not there. And while I strongly believe that a lot of AI has allowed some of us to get past that, there are still holes, there are still limits, and there are still elements of this where it falls into the uncanny valley and throws users off. And then lastly, I will mention that ChatGPT 4.0 just came out with some new capabilities, and it is supposed to be more multimodal than the previous iterations of it. That was not used in the presentation of this. It's something I've tracked a little bit, but I'm not fully familiar with that. So design with the latest version of ChatGPT. And of course, Gemini and Llama and stuff have also made some massive advancements, even in the past few months since I put some of the earliest content for this together. Robots aren't necessarily known for their and so this one, apparently I have my voice for the lecture on. Happens to later. So I am a big person. I love dad jokes. I love puns. And so I thought I'd have AI. I think I'm back. I don't know what happened there, but let's get back to this. All right. Sorry about that. I don't know why I dropped, but let me take the voices off of this so you have to listen to me talk twice. Okay, so what I was saying was I like jokes, I like puns and dad jokes, and I wanted AI to help me out with that a little bit here. So I had it give me punchline for the question. Why did the generative AI apply for a job in conversational design? Because it wanted to talk the talk and walk the chatbot. This is where I hope some of you are grimacing right about now, because I would have done something very similar on my own with or without AI for this. Why did generative AI start its own fashion line? Because it realized it could generate style without ever suffering from designer's block. All right. More bad jokes from AI brought to you by me for this here. Why asked it to generate? All right, we'll skip those because I have my voice left in those here. But I had some other jokes I had to ask about why AI, would predict about what AI would predict about itself in the future, and it kind of made fun of itself for its inability to actually predict the future with a crystal ball. But jokes aside, let's get to some of the more serious questions that are interesting here. And in just a moment, I'm going to ask you to be interactive with me. I'm going to post a link to answer a couple quick questions here that are going to be focused around a couple things I'm going to just say here, which is, one, do we think that conversational AI designers will be, or conversational designers will be replaced by AI? Do we think it's going to be replacing those people closest to us? For example, when there are people who are doing user studies and doing usability, is it going to replace them and the information that we get from them to design our systems? And is it going to be possible that it's not going to necessarily replace us, but replace certain aspects of our jobs? Is it going to start doing our calendaring for us, automatically determining if we have time for a meeting, if we should even have the meeting or not, make those appointments and notify us later here? Is it going to reduce the amount of work we have to do? I show a stack of papers here, but you think about that for the amount of Figma boards we put together for a flow, or the number of prompts we have to manually write in an Excel sheet or whatever it may be. What's it going to do for that? So with those in mind, let's see when it dropped me from this, if this is still in there. I'm going to ask you to go to menti.com and then enter the code. If someone would type this in the chat window for me, the code 21740406, and I'll have you answer the first three questions here. And I'll go over those here briefly, and those things will start to come up here. But again, it'll be menti.com. And you should be able to do this without entering a code. If you'll use code without registering, you'll enter code 21740406. And the first question I want you to do is, from the top of your head, without overthinking this, think about 1 to 3 words about how you perceive AI in your future job. And if this works as I've seen it elsewhere, as those start to come in, it should start populating here in a word cloud, and we can see what everyone is feeling like Words describe the role of AI in their future job. Give you just a moment to do that. In the meantime, I'll pull the chat back up and say hello back from the US for the person here in London. All right. So I already like the first three words that have popped up here: slave, helper, and assistant. Here we have helpful as well. Sure hope so. So we get a few more words in here, and then we'll go on to the next question here in a second and see what everyone has to say. Substitute, okay. Collaborator, simplify, assistant, sidekick. Ooh, a sidekick, I like that one. Makes me feel like a superhero in a way. If I'm still doing my job right and my employer is still happy with me, it's my lovely sidekick here. Okay, so these still come in. You'll see them pop up here for a minute, but you can take a look and see that there's a variety of different words that everyone has come together with here. And these are things that I will, if with the dump of this, I can share afterwards for those interested in following after here. But it gives you an idea for some of the things that, at least amongst this audience, that people are perceiving about how AI might affect our future job. All right, so let's go on to the next question here then. So I'm going to have you answer this question. Which of the following best describes how AI has affected your job as of today? Now, these may have more than one that's technically true, but I'm going to ask you to select the one that you feel most accurately describes your role here, ranging from I've been entirely replaced by AI, moving down where it's replaced some functions, where it assists you with most or a few, you don't use it at all, and the what's a GPT for those who are less familiar, if I've if you've not heard of much of this as many of us have here. And as these answers come in here, I will say that myself, you'll see some examples here for me. At RIT teaching, it did not necessarily replace me, but it was used in some aspects of my job. And then prior to that at Cerence, we were just starting to use it while we were there, although it may have something to do with part of why some of us were let go. Is it's the type of thing that isn't, it's more powerful and that they've integrated pretty heavily into their tools. Okay, so here what we have is most people saying that they are using it to assist them in a few aspects of their job, which I think is going to be really key when we start talking about tool versus teammate in particular. When we get to that point, you'll see then that I would argue that you're likely talking about this as a tool that you're currently using in your daily lives or your work lives anyway. So one more question to get this going before we get into this here. Before I've even fully defined these, I want you to tell me that which of these you think best describes the role that AI takes in conversational design at your company. Don't type fast, kids. It makes mistakes. Do you feel that it is best described as a tool, a teammate, or a person in your company? So I'm asking this now, and I'm going to, spoilers, ask this again at the end after I've defined these, talked about them a bit, and see what everyone thinks, if this is still the way they perceive it after I've given at least my definitions of the terms here. And I may have already kind of prefaced this in the last slide where I was telling people that, oh, it looks like many of you are reporting this as a tool. So how's that for good leadership there. So looking at this here, we see that aligns pretty much the same distribution, just flipped on the screen, where more people are saying tool versus a teammate. All right. So let's get back to PowerPoint then and answer this in a moment and see what everyone else has to think or has to say. All right, so let me get right into this. I have some strong opinions here, but I don't think I have all the opinions, all the right opinions. And this is something that I'm hoping at some point, at least someone here is scratching their head, like, no, I don't agree with that, because it is early days for the way that AI is being used here. And I try to back my opinions with some data from my own experience and from some of the literature. You'll see me talk about some academic stuff in a moment. But I'm hoping that not everyone here agrees, because I think this is an area that we need some disagreement on to get some strong answers as to how things are used and how they can be used for us in order to help, be mindful of us as individuals to use it ethically and things like that. So I did ask generative AI to let me know what it thought. This was back with DALL-E 2 days. If it could generate a cartoon that says we have no idea. Like I said, I don't think any of us have all the answers in the space yet. I think we are starting to form some good opinions here. I chose to use an older image because I wanted to showcase, though, that DALL-E 2, when I generated this about a year ago for this image, if you've looked at the latest DALL-E versions or other versions of AI, you'll see that image generations come a long way. And that I think in and of itself helps answer the question about the role it's going to take, is just looking at the advancement that it's had. Okay, so let me get academic for a moment here and talk about an area of science I geek about a bit here. In the human factors literature, there's a big topic of the ways that humans interact with automated systems, with automation in general. And this is a standard model that's been used for nearly 25 years now, that talks about how AI or automation can be used, that I would argue translates very neatly to AI, although there is ongoing research to look into this to see if this fits as neatly as I'm going to say it does for the sake of our conversation here. And what you'll see here is two tables over on the right that I want to touch about here briefly. On the top one, you'll see 4 types of tasks that an automated system can do, ranging from gathering information to information analysis, the act of making a decision for the user, and then implementing the action on behalf of the user here. And you'll see that there are these spectrums of the automation level you can have. So in any of these 4 types of tasks, it can be a low or high automated system. And you can have a mix of these across a given tool, maybe even a feature within a tool, as you're going through a system and using it. So this shows 2 systems, one that's highly automated, one that's highly automated on gathering information, but really leaves more and more to the user when it comes to analyzing that, making decisions, and executing those decisions. And on the bottom, you'll see that there is a list of 9 levels that this model proposes on how these can be interactive with the user. From the lowest level, level 1, where the computer is offering no assistance for the humans doing everything. For us in conversational design, you are legitimately typing every prompt. You are legitimately deciding how to use them. You are doing the background research on all the users. No information provided to you. You're doing everything on your own. And you can move down the chart here and you'll see that it might actually start to say, okay, I've got some information. Here are some things. I get this timing off here. Here are some things that that you might be able to do with this. And it goes down further and it's like, all right, if you'd like, I can do one of these things for you. Or it may even go, okay, if you don't tell me no, I'm going to do this for you. Down further where it does it and lets you know, okay, just so you know, I did this for you. And at the bottom, then it might actually do something and never even tell you unless it decides it wants to. And now, before I go on with this, I want you to think about this from 2 perspectives. Think about this in your life as a conversational designer, as a designer, as a researcher, whatever it may be. And think about what this means for you when you're using AI as an automated tool or teammate. And then think about this from the perspective of the end user. If you're building a system for someone and they can ask it questions and interact with it, what are they experiencing as well? Because it may be very different. You may have a highly automated set of tools that you're doing to build interfaces, crank out things that fit to a neat design system you've already put together, and you have an AI agent helping provide for you. But you may have some tasks for your end users that are much more manual. And it could be the opposite. So as I think about this, I will mostly be talking about it as it affects us as designers. But keep in mind that this applies equally to how you design it for the end user on the other side of the interface. So the way I'm defining a tool here is when you're using AI on these lower steps here. And I highlight 2 to 3 on low automation for the most part, as you can see here. And again, these are neat ellipses that may not necessarily fit that neatly in practice, but they illustrate the point here. And this is where I'm arguing that you're using AI where it can take tasks on its own if they're kind of minimalistic, but it's really low automated. It's more a matter of you're going into a system and you are going to be deciding if, how, and when to use it. And it does something for you, gives it to you, and you're back on your own until you're ready for it for the next thing here. Now, maybe, for example, I'll give some examples when I use in Canva, they have the ability to generate images where you provide it with a prompt and it generates 4 images for you. One could argue that's level 4 here, where it's or 3 or 4 here where it's giving me a few images that it generates. There's times where it does indeed narrow down information for you, but they're all still relatively low automation. And so that's how I would argue that things are used as a tool here. But if we want to talk about this as a teammate here, it's where we start to get to the higher levels here. And I want you to think about AI as a teammate here when it's working alongside you, much like someone else would, much like Olivera and I used to do when we would work together, where it's there, it's taken over tasks probably in their entirety in some regard, and it's something that you're communicating with, going back and forth with here, where it's not necessarily doing everything on its own. It's still kind of letting you monitor it to a degree. But it's increasing in its ability to do these things here, but you're still largely kind of overseeing it to a degree, except where you're delegating things where it can act as if a teammate of yours would do on its own here. As a person, this one I think is a bit clearer for the most part, in that this is where it's doing things on its own. This is where, no, I've been replaced by a conversational designer AI agent, or my colleague has been replaced entirely. It's when it's able to do things automatically, and it's pretty much autonomous until someone comes to it and actually asks for a report or whatnot. Much like your manager might meet with you once a week, it's possible that someone goes in and looks over logs and the data and things like that happen here as well here. Now, I did want to mention one thing I'm not talking about here is I am overlooking the interaction part in some of this here. It is possible that you have a slew of these. You can classify different tools that you're using within your company or on your own that might have all different levels here. And this doesn't necessarily account for the fact that maybe you have a teammate that automatically has APIs and can interface with different tools on your behalf if you tell it to, and without it, I'm just ignoring those types of interactions for the sake of this discussion. So before I get into some examples for this, I did want to talk a little bit about how I have used AI in the past a little bit for ideation and feedback, and bring up some concerns for this as well, to give some examples of how I've used it, and you can see how you think that fits into the framework here. Within the idea of the creative process itself here, I often use this to get going, to help me iterate in particular. It is indeed mostly tool-like, I would argue, is how I've used it here. But where my primary role is trying to overcome limitations that it has. I often argue that you'll notice with the limitations with hallucinations, you'll notice the limitations with inaccurate data here, that a lot more of my time I'm using AI, I'm spending doing quality assurance. So if I'm having it generate an interaction flow for me of someone making a restaurant reservation, I'm going back through that and I'm playing quality assurance in a way here to try to get at that a little bit here. So it's providing me some advantages here, and I'm definitely incorporating it into the things I'm doing here. But I'm finding myself being more of a QA designer, maybe in a sense, in that way. But I wanted to use 2 specific examples to point out some real limitations here I've noticed that I think are worth highlighting too. In my HCI course that I just finished teaching, I had my students do an assignment entirely using AI. And this was for user research, and they could choose the topic. And I did have one that went with conversational AI, 2 with accessibility, 2 with VR and AR, and things along those lines. And they had to come up with an idea to study, come up with a hypothesis using an LLM such as ChatGPT or Gemini. They had to have it come up with a mock set of data for them, analyze the data with them, give me some peer-reviewed journal articles, and then come together with what the conclusions of a study might be, and then write an abstract for me that had to be exactly between 140 and 150 words here. And this was a fascinating assignment because this is an area that highlighted that, one, things like word limits, AI focuses and weights making a natural sounding set of sentences heavier than it does following directions. So a lot of my papers came back over or under the word counts because it prioritized natural language over the requirements of the person generating the prompt. Even with prompt engineering, it would often miss that requirement. And it also made up journal articles. It would find someone in the field who was an expert in a given thing, like accessibility, accessibility systems and education. And then it would find other names that had ever come up on that topic, and it would give an author list, the title of a paper, and an abstract that didn't even exist. In fact, with ChatGPT, 70% of the papers that came in were not real papers. And going back and looking at previous assignments, some of my students found that I had truly flagged that they had cited papers that did not exist. Just a quick cursory check, I'd found that people were using AI and not disclosing it. And the context of research, that's problematic because it implies that more papers are going to continue to be published with imaginary works in them that are going to then be cited, and things are going to build off that as science is iterative. And think about this as you decide what's the best practice when you're designing a system for yourself. If you are making your decisions based off of something that it's made up with the goal of just making it sound natural.
What happened?
I did? You may be introducing some of these issues yourself into the systems. So I thought that was a meaningful thing worth sharing here. And then lastly, I think I've talked about this a lot, so I won't go too much into this, but I've used this for job applications for AI. And I wanted to highlight, again, a limitation for natural language usage of this. You'll find that words like meticulous show up far more often than I would write them, even though I tend to use that occasionally myself. And you tend to find that the things I write feel like they're written by AI if you've had any real exposure to that. And that's something that, as I use this for designing some interfaces, where I've done some of that myself, it quickly became clear that it fell into its own trap, sometimes its own patterns. It had its own design flavor, let's say, that it repeated, and it took extensive prompt engineering to get around. Okay, so just some specific examples of how I use this. I wanted to talk about how some of the benefits from me using generative AI included that I could avoid fixation, design fixation, working on these systems. So by this, I mean my own style. I have a way that I say things the same way. And while, yes, it's great for a conversational assistant to have a consistent persona, vocabulary, et cetera here, it's hard to get out of your own box sometimes. And generative AI is great for this to help you get out of that box and not just do the same thing again, again, and again here. And as at Cerence, we work predominantly with automakers, with large, OEMs. They wanted their own brand and their own feeling. And this is an area I found that I could tell it to take the Mercedes feelings to prompts if I played with them a little bit. And it would, look at what it knew about Mercedes and try to adjust its prompts accordingly to match the brand. But it's an area that allows you, if you know what you're doing with AI, to be able to apply your brand a bit more clearly and make it differentiate itself maybe a little bit more here. So you can see the other things I've listed here as to how I have used this within this that I won't go through in more detail, but I found that it was quite helpful in my work. So let me highlight a few more limitations here, and then I'll get to where we can have some good discussion around this after the last poll here. I actually had an incident where I had my son, at the time he was 9, who loves to play with ChatGPT. And he decided, and I don't know the whole motivation behind this, to ask it to tell him how to eat a meal. And so it prepared directions for him, 8 steps on how one eats a meal here. And then he asked me if I would help him try to have it take that and replace the last letter of every word with the letter E. And you can see this is probably iteration 15-ish or so with that. No matter how much prompt engineering I did, at least this version, 3.5 at the time, of ChatGPT, it could not follow my directions. It could not manage to replace the last letter of every word with the letter E and maintain the last letter as E if it already was. And I tried talking about this in a completely natural way. You'll see here an example where I tried to take it from an engineering perspective to treat every sentence and every word as an array and double check itself to make sure that those arrays did not change in length. And it failed pretty horribly here. And when I asked it why, it couldn't tell me. And so this is one of the things I really want to hit on thinking about when we talk about we're using this as a tool or a teammate here. Without the ability to introspect, if I can't ask an AI assistant that's working with me, why did you choose this? Why did you do this? If I can't rely on that answer, it makes it a lot harder for me to take it at face value for it having made the right decision. It means that my trust needs to be appropriately calibrated here. It means I need to trust it enough, but not too much at any given time here. Because if I work with people who are doing their job and doing it well, I can ask why they made decisions. I can ask why they made a design decision, and they can do their best to explain it to me. And we can have a conversation, and we can build on that and help each other improve an outcome here. At the moment, this is not particularly good. Most of the models out there, all of them, are not particularly good at giving the best answers. And in fact, sometimes I'd argue they even gaslight you into thinking that they did and that you're wrong, as I saw with the assignment I gave my students, where it assured them it was doing exactly what they were told and it could not give a reason and ensure them they were wrong. So there are definitely some limitations here that I think are going to prevent it from getting too far up that chain from tool to teammate to person. And especially now, if you're having it as a person, that honestly terrify me a little bit if this is doing the entire job of a person when it can't fix some of these mistakes. And I should be overly harsh. These types of things are getting improved quickly, but they are still an issue. So one more example I wanted to give here was from a former colleague that some of us had worked with who has taken a liking to talking about the way that AI can be used for law, for attorneys, for counsels at large corporations and this sort. And he was talking about on LinkedIn how it became obvious things were written by ChatGPT. And I would argue, again, going back to us as using this as a tool, part of why QA is needed here, why we're doing QA of these systems and using them as tools, is because you can really kind of tell when things are written by ChatGPT. And that can be okay in the right circumstances, but it's something you have to make a design decision if you're okay with it feeling like it coming from ChatGPT or not. So there was an interesting set of discussion around this as well. For the sake of time, I'll skip over a second one here that you may be able to see, but where the same guy was talking about how attorneys who've been using AI forever, attorneys who haven't been using AI forever in their career might be just fine not using it. For now, how eventually it's going to become more and more commonplace. But someone who's been practicing law for 35 years and plans to retire in 5 years might be pretty successful with or without the use of AI for the time being. And I would say for conversational AI, there are certain elements for now, but I think you can get away without using it. Certain things that I don't think it's mandatory, and it will be in the near future. That I think there's still a role for us that's important. Although I think at a certain point that becomes problematic if we don't. So the three kind of outcomes I wanted to give an example here, thinking about tool, teammate, a person here. And I wanted to pitch this around the idea of having three different companies who take three different approaches to replacing us or augmenting us or making available to us tools to do our jobs as we create these conversational assistants here. So let's say we've got one company here who decides that they're going to be very conservative. They're going to see how other people use it, and they're waiting to implement AI. And sure, it's possible that Adobe and Figma integrate their own bots that are used to a degree, but at the larger scale here, those are probably things you're being discouraged or told not to use until they can vet that they pass security policies, that they do everything they're supposed to do, things that are generally good, but might be taken too far conservatively for the time. And I would argue that the company, the team, the departments that neglect AI fall behind, and eventually it'll be hard to catch up. If it's 2026 and you've got designers who haven't figured out how to use AI in some way, I'm going to argue that they're likely going to be far more at risk than those who have figured out how to use it somewhat. You could argue that on the other side, you might have a company that fully embraces AI, that the minute this newest ChatGPT 4.0 came out, they were giving it to everyone and making it completely available, assuming that OpenAI had done their due diligence here. And it's ready to start replacing people. Jobs are disappearing, and it is indeed spitting things out. And yeah, maybe they've kept one person on to do the QA I mentioned, but people are indeed being replaced, and people we work with are being replaced here. And I think some of these companies are going to find in the short term that they're going to find that this works in some ways, that they're going to find that some costs are going to be down in the short term. And that in particular, if people are working on something that's been already commoditized, something that's already a very well-oiled machine where they can monitor for a bit and then turn this loose, they might actually find some real success on just making iterations on things. If you are designing a system that is in US English, and this is something that you are selling to an emerging market where we don't tend to go heavily into localization already, it's possible these companies are localizing things into less used languages and are selling them into new markets where people have never had access to conversational assistants due to the localization effort and are happy to have anything for now. And in the short term, that might be acceptable to the end user to be able to do that. So there may be some success here. But I mean, for now, take a moment and imagine sitting in your car, having a smart speaker where all conversations are entirely designed by ChatGPT, right? It's going to do some awesome things like you interact with it now, but there's going to be some real holes there. If there's no one there to fix those things like that, there's going to be some issues here. So I would argue that this company will have some success for sure, and you'll see more where this becomes viable. But here, I'm at least arguing, and again, this is welcome to debate, that this will be more successful than the last, but not the ideal situation, which would be company C, where there is a hybrid approach, where you're taking the time to figure out how AI can and should aid people, figure out if it should even be replacing people, and ideally figuring out, instead of replacing people, how to make them complement each other more neatly. I keep referring to being, a design QA person here, figuring out that, maybe we don't let go this team of designers, but rather maybe we give them tools to what they can do. And as it becomes more and more automated, they're there to make sure that we still feel like Apple, that we still feel like our brand, that we're still not feeling like a machine, providing our users an experiment or an experience that is personalized and humanized in a really important and powerful way. So, after all this, I'm curious what you all think. I am going to, just out of curiosity, have you go back to that Menti one more time and answer this same question we asked before. Given my definitions, my thoughts, I want you to go in one last time. It'll be the same link and see if your answers have changed at all, if you feel like the AI that you're using is a tool, a teammate, or a person. And then once this is done, we will open this up for some discussion and questions. All right, so first person's ready to go, saying that it's a teammate already. Got two, so we beat already from before. We're tied so far. Who wants to be the tiebreaker here for the final word on this one before we have a discussion? All right. We're neck and neck again. Okay, so it's interesting to see this. A few more people started saying that they were thinking about it as using a teammate than before. And as we end the discussion, if anyone changed their mind, I'll welcome you if you feel up to it to explain why and what your perspective is. Let's get back here then. So lastly, just kind of to end on a dad joke before we have the discussion here, you'll notice the picture I share shows me with my short hair, an older picture here. And I got teased about that after this presentation once, or an earlier version of this long ago. And so I had AI try to adapt what I look like and was flattered by what it came up with. As you'll see here, longer hair is great. I do not look like these four people in the bottom left here. But so let's go ahead and open this up for questions and discussion for those who have anything to say.
Okay, Adam, thank you so much. We are seeing a question in the chat from Matthew Dobson. Are hallucinations as prevalent with an LLM trained to interact with specific enterprise data? For example, Q&A session with a financial or legal documents?
This is a fascinating question, one I don't think has a completely certain answer, but I think we have a pretty good idea for that. There's an interesting company out there called Prion that they are working on training enterprise models, basically, where you can ingest any company data in and come out with more or less a chat bot that you can ask for things about this. And one of their biggest goals is indeed to reduce hallucinations here. And I don't know their data intimately and how successful they've been with this, but from some discussions I've had with some people there, if it's as good as the data is, right? If the data that they're being provided has a bunch of bad data in there, or if it overrepresents the some of the things based off of the distribution of things that are in there, it's more likely to hallucinate. And part of what they're doing in this context is they're coming up with ways to make it easier for people to kind of have some insight as to what actually gets trained in the model and what comes out. So I can't speak from my own experience with great use of enterprise systems, but in my experience, because they actually have a little bit more like investment in training on more localized, more specialized data, my perception is that they hallucinate less, but there's still plenty of a risk, and that a huge part of the effort is in trying to reduce those for those such that these come out better. And when you talk about legal documents here, there is huge, huge effort and time that goes into those to make sure before those are released to the companies that people are not getting legal advice that they should not be getting from these enterprise systems, because the implications there are massive. And so that's the type of thing where I am aware that they are trying to put in more safeguards. And those are both in the area of training the data, but they're also in the area of not allowing people to ask legal questions sometimes until they have things set up where it's safe.
That's great. Excellent. Thank you, Adam.
You're welcome.
All right, and we have another question here from Olivera. She says, when it comes to hallucinations with RAG, could you comment on that, Adam?
All right. So RAG, fill me in here. Am I missing an acronym I should absolutely know?
So what is meant by RAG is, hi. So what I mean by RAG is when instead of scraping the web, it's going to use an actual document internally, so that there's less chances of it getting it wrong. So I'm just, and I know that is the case, that it's going to perform better than if it was scraping from a web. But if you can comment about that, would be great.
Yeah. So let me use an example of Confluence, and Olivera, I'll pick on our Confluence that we had at Cerence, as it is everywhere else I've ever been, an imperfect place where people are uploading their own documents for there. If you have a bunch of those documents and people organize them well, the data is clean, then similar to what I was mentioning before, hallucinations are going to be less if they're representative of the types of things people are going to ask, and the representative of the data that needs to come out the other end for that. And so they will typically be lower. But I will add, similar to kind of the last point here, if there's a misalignment between what people are asking and what the documents contain, even if they're internal documents, the risk of hallucination remains greater. So people are asking questions, kind of a good example off the cuff here, that have to do with user studies about how people interact with certain type of assistants. Let's say I've got a bunch of user studies on Alexa. And then people start to talk about something that takes place with a system that is not a smart speaker and is something completely different. And the data is all trained on Alexa experiences. And I start asking questions about what Google might do or things like that. It's more likely to have hallucinations and things like that have to do with a mismatch of the data with the inputs that are being put into that. That helps.
That does help. And that's excellent. So organization of data, clean data. But that's an interesting point about the conflicting information in the context of enterprise data, because that does exist.
Mm-hmm.
Potentially that's a big benefit in terms of flagging and any conflict of data or information. But that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, just briefly, one last point on that I'll add. If you think about traditional natural language understanding models, you understand very easily, for those who work with them at all, that they're only as good as the data they're trained on being representative. And LLMs, things like this, like GPTs, tend to be trained on much more robust sets of data and can fill in the gaps much more successful. But still, that representation of what it sees the world and what they think will be asked in this, it will make the leap for you. It will try to answer that, but that leap introduces more risk.
Mm.
All right. What other questions do we have?
Feel free to call them out or add them to the chat. Great discussion so far.
Fatima, you mentioned something while people are getting ready about using a Gen AI course where they graded your assignments on how you can improve. I wanted to highlight something with this. Turnitin is an academic service that looks for plagiarism in papers, if you haven't ever heard of it. And it gives a score for the percentage of a paper that has plagiarized content, and it gives sources for that. And they've recently introduced an AI one that estimates the percentage of paper it thinks was written by AI. And after using this for about 9 months, the RIT where I was at decided to discontinue its use because I found it unreliable. I would have students who I would see drafts of the paper and know that they had done on their own. And then it would come back with a 76% generative AI when I was confident that it wasn't. And sometimes it'd be zero when they submitted my generative AI assignment. So it's imperfect for things like that. Things are going to get better and harder to detect as these models get better. But I did want to mention that AI detection in particular right now is very early stages and is pretty flawed as well.
Yes, yes, Adam. I get what you're trying to say, but in my course, they had created an entire grade chat bot with help of OpenAI's ChatGPT model, and they had created an entire agent which could grade my assignments based on the previous assignments, sample assignments, and how the responses or how the assignments would look like.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So they had already feed in sample data of how a particular assignment would look like and how they would rate an assignment. So they had also created a classification table, and they had done really interesting use case with the GradeBot AI. So that was interesting to see from the course.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Adam. It's been great with your session today. I think we really enjoyed all of the interactions and examples you mentioned.
Thank you. I see a question, a couple of minutes for us. I see a question from Olivera as well. About how do I anticipate we'll be able to handle hallucinations more effectively in the future? I think a lot of that will come through just actual improvement in training. I mean, that's something that's happening largely. Where we will see the biggest one. But I think that the tooling that those who are training one, especially enterprise, is going to improve in a way that will actually handle that well. And I do think the introspection is going to get better, where someone can ask, "Are you sure?" and it can actually understand itself better and make some of those answers. I think this is one of the biggest limitations in the short term, but it's actually one that I think 5 years from now will be a problem, but one that we feel like we've got a pretty good handle on for sure by then.
Hey, Adam, Jenny, I'm going to sneak in one question. So I love what you said about having to do QA on, all of this AI stuff. And that's how I feel. Yeah, I get stuck and I get frustrated, and even just an image creation, it doesn't do it. And so I have to do it on my own. I find myself wanting I want to reverse those roles. I wanted to do QA on my work. I wanted to do the tedious stuff, but these tools don't seem to really be designed for that. Yeah, so I don't know how clear my question is, but I mean, do you see a way to get there? Do you see us going there? Are we just going so fast on, having it do everything that it's just going to totally bypass, this maybe what could be an interesting intermediate and super helpful step?
I mean, I think you're going to see a split. There's definitely going to be some attempts to just keep moving as fast as possible. We've definitely seen that a lot. And there's definitely OpenAI is one who has some controversy, from their origin, like the roots to where they are now, and how they seem to be moving more rapidly than some people like. But I think especially going back to the enterprise space, including applications for things like ChatGPT, that people are quickly realizing, at least companies who care enough to, that they do have to take a step back and not just have the bots set up in a way that their goal is to move the conversation forward, where there is the ability to have those things put in there. In fact, I'll use an example from stuff we did before. We talked about having a behind the scenes view that we used to have in some tools we used at Cerence, where you could see what the machine was thinking behind there and how valuable that made for our own QA, for engineering and design to be able to look at that. And I think that's going to inherently become the part of these tool sets, especially enterprise, especially things that are made available to do-it-yourself devs using public APIs. I really do think that QA is going to have to become a part of the picture. And I think a lot of the success will be coming from those that do that. I think it's inevitable in some ways, and in some ways, those who can't do it will probably find less success and those who do that. And I genuinely mean that, finding that I think it will help us be more successful in our own jobs and keep them too. All right. So once again, I want to thank everyone for coming out. I really appreciate your time, your questions, and discussion here. So thank you all so much.
Thanks, Adam, for your presentation. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise, and I really liked the interactive polls that you did. That was really fun. And thanks everyone for participating today. We'll be sending out a feedback form with the recording of this event, so you can provide your feedback and we can continue to improve and bring you more valuable events in the future. We've also posted a link to our next masterclass with Adam in a couple weeks on May 29th, where we'll focus on ethics, bias, and transparency and privacy. So signups are open, go ahead and keep up with us. Join our LinkedIn group and sign up for our newsletter. And as always, thank you to Voiceful for sponsoring us, and have a great day. See everyone soon.
Thanks, everyone.